Thank you for joining us this evening for Episode 3 of The Unpleasant Profession of Jonathan Hoag, a science fantasy novella by American writer Robert A. Heinlein. In Episode 1, Jonathan Hoag discovered brown grime under his nails and realized he did not know what he did during the day. In Episode 2, Cynthia Craig and Theodore Randall of the firm Randall Craig Confidential Investigators were confident that they had solved Hoag's dilemma. Teddy had followed Hoag to a commercial jeweler's and was sure the brown grime under his nails was jeweler's rouge. Episode 2 concludes with Teddy asking Cynthia why she didn't tag along into the Acme building, where he had followed Hoag up to the 13th floor to the jeweler's office suite. Tonight, Cynthia and Teddy discover that an office building is a terribly remote and secret place where anything could go on and nobody would know or care. And now we begin Episode 3.
She hesitated a little in replying. She did not want to admit how clumsy she had been, but the habit of complete honesty with each other was strong upon her.
I let myself get misled when Hoag spoke to you outside the Acme building. I missed you at the elevator.
I see. Well, what did you say? Did you say Hoag spoke to me?
Yes, certainly.
But he didn't speak to me. He never laid eyes on me. What are you talking about?
What am I talking about? What are you talking about? Just before the two of you went into the Acme building, Hoag stopped, turned around, and spoke to you. The two of you stood there chinning, which threw me off stride. Then you went into the lobby together, practically arm in arm.
He sat there, saying nothing, looking at her for a long moment. At last she said,
Don't sit there staring like a goon. That's what happened.
Sin, listen to my story. I got off the bus after he did and followed him into the lobby, used the old heel and toe getting into the elevator, and swung behind him when he faced the front of the car. When he got out, I hung back, then fiddled around, half in and half out, asking the operator simpleton questions, grilling him long enough to get clear. When I turned the corner, he was just disappearing into 1310. He never spoke to me. He never saw my face. I'm sure of that.
She was looking white.
Go on.
When you go in this place, there is a long glass partition on your right with benches built up against it. You can look through the glass and see the jewelers or jewelsmiths or whatever you call them at work. Clever, good salesmanship. Hoag ducked right on in, and by the time I passed down the aisle, he was already on the other side, his coat off and a smock on, and one of those magnifying dinguses screwed into his eye. I went on past him to the desk. He never looked up, and asked for the manager. Presently, a little bird-like guy shows up, and I ask him if they had a man named Jonathan Hoag in their employ. He says yes, and asks if I want to speak to him. I told him no, that I was an investigator for an insurance company. He wants to know if there is anything wrong, and I told him that it was simply a routine investigation of what he had said on his application for a life policy, and how long had he worked there. 5 years, he told me. He said that Hoag was one of their most reliable and skillful employees. I said fine, and asked if he thought Mr. Hoag could afford to carry as much as 10,000. He says certainly, and that they were always glad to see their employees invest in life insurance, which is what I figured when I gave him the stall. As I went out, I stopped in front of Hoag's bench and looked at him through the glass. Presently, he looked up and stared at me, then looked down again. I'm sure I would have spotted it if he had recognized me. A case of complete schizo How do you pronounce it?
Schizophrenia, completely split personalities. But look, Teddy,
Yeah?
you did talk with him. I saw you.
Now slow down, Puss. You may think you did, but you must have been looking at two other guys. How far away were you?
Not that far. I was standing in front of Beecham's Bootery. Then comes Chez Louis and then the entrance to the Acme building. You had your back to the newspaper stand at the curb and were practically facing me. Hoag had his back to me, but I couldn't have been mistaken, as I had him in full profile when the two of you turned and went into the building together.
Randall looked exasperated.
I didn't speak with him, and I didn't go in with him. I followed him in.
Edward Randall, don't give me that. I admit I lost the two of you, but that's no reason to rub it in by trying to make a fool of me.
Randall had been married too long and too comfortably not to respect danger signals. He got up, went to her, and put an arm around her.
Look, kid, I'm not pulling your leg. We've got our wires crossed somehow, but I'm giving it to you just as straight as I can, the way I remember it.
She searched his eyes, then kissed him suddenly and pulled away.
All right, we're both right, and it's impossible. Come on.
Come on, where?
To the scene of the crime. If I don't get this straightened out, I'll never sleep again.
The Acme building was just where they had left it. The Bouterie was where it belonged, likewise Chez Louis, and the newsstand. He stood where she had stood and agreed that she could not have been mistaken in her identification unless blind drunk. But he was equally positive as to what he had done.
You didn't pick up a snifter or two on the way, did you?
Certainly not.
What do we do now?
I don't know. Yes, I do know. We're all finished with Hoag, aren't we? You've traced him down, and that's that.
Yes. Why?
Take me up to where he works. I want to ask his daytime personality whether or not he spoke to you getting off the bus.
He shrugged.
Okay, kid, it's your party.
They went inside and entered the first free elevator. The starter clicked his castanets. The operator slammed his doors.
Floors, please.
6, 3, and 9. Randall waited until those had been served before announcing.
13.
The operator looked around.
I could give you 12 and 14, buddy, and you can split them.
Huh?
There ain't no 13th floor. If there was, nobody would rent on it.
You must be mistaken. I was on it this morning.
The operator gave him a look of marked restraint.
See for yourself.
He shot the car upward and halted it.
12.
He raised the car slowly. The figure 12 slid out of sight and was quickly replaced by another.
14. Which way will you have it?
I'm sorry. I've made a silly mistake. I really was in here this morning and I thought I had noted the floor.
Might have been 18. Sometimes an 8 will look like a 3. Who you looking for?
Detheridge and Company. They're manufacturing jewelers.
The operator shook his head.
Not in this building. No jewelers and no Detheridge.
You're sure?
Instead of answering, the operator dropped his car back to the 10th floor.
Try 1001. It's the office of the building.
No, they had no Detheridge. No jewelers, manufacturing or otherwise. Could it be the Apex building the gentleman wanted rather than Acme? Randall thanked them and left, considerably shaken. Cynthia had maintained complete silence during the proceedings. Now she said,
Darling,
Yeah, what is it?
we could go up to the top floor and work down.
Why bother? If they were here, the building office would know about it.
So they would, but they might not be telling. There is something fishy about this whole business. Come to think about it, you could hide a whole floor of an office building by making its door look like a blank wall.
No, that's silly. I'm just losing my mind, that's all. You better take me to a doctor.
It's not silly, and you're not losing your grip. How do you count height in an elevator? By floors. If you didn't see a floor, you would never realize an extra one was tucked in. We may be on the trail of something big.
she did not really believe her own arguments, but she knew that he needed something to do. He started to agree, then checked himself.
How about the stairways? You're bound to notice the floor from the staircase.
Maybe there is some hanky-panky with the staircases too. If so, we'll be looking for it. Come on.
But there was not. There were exactly the same number of steps, 18, between floor 12 and 14, as there were between any other pair of adjacent floors. They worked down from the top floor and examined the lettering on each frosted glass door. This took them rather long, as Cynthia would not listen to Randall's suggestion that they split up and take half a floor apiece. She wanted him in her sight. No 13th floor and nowhere a door which announced the tenancy of a firm of manufacturing jewelers, neither Deathreach and Company, nor any other name. There was not time to do more than read the firm names on the doors. To have entered each office on one pretext or another would have taken much more than a day. Randall stared thoughtfully at the door labeled Pride, Green, Hamilton, Steinbolt, Carter and Greenway, attorneys at law.
By this time, they could have changed the lettering on the door.
Not on that one. Anyhow, if it was a setup, they could have cleared out the whole joint too, changed it so you couldn't recognize it.
Nevertheless, she stared at the innocent-seeming letters thoughtfully. An office building was a terribly remote and secret place. Soundproof walls, Venetian blinds, and a meaningless firm name. Anything could go on in such a place. Anything. Nobody would know. Nobody would care. No one would ever notice. No policeman on his beat. Neighbors as remote as the moon. Not even scrub service if the tenant did not wish it. As long as the rent was paid on time, the management would leave a tenant alone. Any crime you fancied and park the bodies in the closet. She shivered.
Come on, Teddy, let's hurry.
They covered the remaining floors as quickly as possible and came out at last in the lobby. Cynthia felt warm by the sight of faces and sunlight, even though they had not found the missing firm. Randall stopped on the steps and looked around.
Do you suppose they could have been in a different building?
Not a chance. See that cigar stand? I practically lived there. I know every fly speck on the counter.
Then what's the answer?
Lunch is the answer. Come on.
Okay, but I'm going to drink mine.
She managed to persuade him to encompass a plate of corned beef hash after the third whiskey sour. That and 2 cups of coffee left him entirely sober, but unhappy.
Sin,
Yes, Teddy?
what happened to me?
I think you were made the victim of an amazing piece of hypnosis.
So do I, now. Either that or I finally cracked up. So call it hypnosis. I want to know why.
She made doodles with her fork.
I'm not sure that I want to know. You know what I would like to do, Teddy?
What?
I would like to send Mr. Hoag's $500 back to him with a message that we can't help him, so we are returning his money.
He stared at her.
Send the money back? Good heavens.
Her face looked as if she had been caught making an indecent suggestion, but she went on stubbornly.
I know. Just the same, that's what I'd like to do. We can make enough on divorce cases and skip tracing to eat on. We don't have to monkey with a thing like this.
You talk like 500 was something you'd use to tip a waiter.
No, I don't. I just don't think it's enough to risk your neck or your sanity for. Look, Teddy, somebody is trying to get us in the 9-hole. Before we get any further, I want to know why.
And I want to know why too, which is why I'm not willing to drop the matter. Damn it, I don't like having shenanigans put over on me.
What are you going to tell Mr. Hoag?
He ran a hand through his hair, which did not matter as it was already mussed.
I don't know. Suppose you talk to him. Give him a stall.
That's a fine idea. That's a swell idea. I'll tell him you've broken your leg, but you'll be all right tomorrow.
Don't be like that, Sin. You know you can handle him.
All right. But you've got to promise me this, Teddy.
Promise what?
As long as we're on this case, we do everything together.
Don't we always?
I mean, really together. I don't want you out of my sight any of the time.
But see here, Sin, that may not be practical.
Promise?
Okay, I promise.
That's better.
She relaxed and looked almost happy.
Hadn't we better get back to the office?
Oh, the hell with it. Let's go out and take in a triple feature.
Okay, Brain.
She gathered up her gloves and purse.
The movies failed to amuse me, although we had selected an all-Western bill, a fare of which I was inordinately fond. But the hero seemed as villainous as the foreman, and the mysterious masked riders, for once, appeared really sinister. And I kept seeing the 13th floor of the Acme building, the long glass partition behind which the craftsmen labored, and the little dried-up manager of Deathridge and Company. Damn it! Could a man be hypnotized into believing that he had seen anything as detailed as that?
Cynthia hardly noticed the pictures.
I was preoccupied with the people around us. I found myself studying their faces guardedly whenever the lights came up. If they looked like this when they were amusing themselves, what were they like when they were unhappy? With rare exceptions, the faces looked, at best, stolidly uncomplaining. Discontent, the grim marks of physical pain, lonely unhappiness, frustration, and stupid meanness. There were many of those I found in numbers, but rarely a merry face. Even Teddy, whose habitual debonair gaiety was one of his chief virtues, was looking dour. With reason. I wondered what were the reasons for those other unhappy masks. I recalled once having seen a painting entitled Subway. It showed a crowd pouring out of the door of an underground train, while another crowd attempted to force its way in. Getting on or getting off, they were plainly in a hurry, yet it seemed to give them no pleasure. The picture had no beauty in itself. It was plain that the artist's single purpose had been to make a bitter criticism of a way of living. I was glad when the show was over and we could escape to the comparative freedom of the street.
Randall flagged a taxi and they started home.
Teddy,
Uh,
did you notice the faces of the people in the theater?
no, not especially. Why?
Not a one of them looked as if they got any fun out of life.
Maybe they don't.
But why don't they? Look, we have fun, don't we?
You bet.
We always have fun. Even when we were broke and trying to get the business started, we had fun. We went to bed smiling and got up happy. We still do. What's the answer?
He smiled for the first time since the search for the 13th floor and pinched her.
It's fun living with you, kid.
Thanks. And right back at you. You know, when I was a little girl, I had a funny idea.
Spill it.
I was happy myself, but as I grew up, I could see that my mother wasn't, and my father wasn't. My teachers weren't. Most of the adults around me weren't happy. I got an idea in my head that when you grew up, you found out something that kept you from ever being happy again. You know how a kid is treated. You're not old enough to understand, dear, and wait till you grow up, darling, and then you'll understand. I used to wonder what the secret was that they were keeping from me, and I'd listen behind doors to try to see if I couldn't find out.
Born to be a detective.
Oh, shush. But I could see that whatever it was, it didn't make the grown-ups happy. It made them sad. Then I used to pray never to find out.
She gave a little shrug.
I guess I never did.
Me neither. A professional Peter Pan, that's me. Just as happy as if I had good sense.
She placed a small gloved hand on his arm.
Don't laugh, Teddy. That's what scares me about this Hoag case. I'm afraid that if we go ahead with it, we really will find out what it is the grown-ups know, and then we'll never laugh again.
He started to laugh, then looked at her hand.
Why, you're really serious, aren't you?
He chucked her under the chin.
Be your age, kid. What you need is dinner and a drink.
Chapter 4. After dinner, Cynthia was just composing in her mind what she would say to Mr. Hoag on telephoning him when the house buzzer rang. She went to the entrance of their apartment and took up the house phone.
Yes?
Almost immediately, she turned to her husband and voicelessly shaped the words.
It's Mr. Hoag.
He raised his eyebrows, put a cautioning finger to his lips, and with an exaggerated tiptoe started for the bedroom. She nodded.
Just a moment, please. There. That's better. We seem to have had a bad connection. Now, who is it, please? Oh, Mr. Hoag. Come up, Mr. Hoag.
She punched the button controlling the electrical outer lock. He came in bobbing nervously.
I trust this is not an intrusion, but I have been so upset that I felt I couldn't wait for a report.
She did not invite him to sit down.
I am sorry to have to disappoint you. Mr. Randall has not yet come home.
Oh,
He seemed pathetically disappointed, so much so that she felt a sudden sympathy. Then she remembered what her husband had been put through that morning and froze up again.
do you know when he will be home?
That I couldn't say. Wives of detectives, Mr. Hoag, learn not to wait up.
Yes, I suppose so. Well, I presume I should not impose on you further, but I am anxious to speak with him.
I'll tell him so. Was there anything in particular you had to say to him? Some new data, perhaps?
No, no. I suppose it all seems so silly.
What does, Mr. Hoag?
He searched her face,
I wonder, Mrs. Randall, do you believe in possession?
Possession?
Possession of human souls by devils.
I can't say that I've thought much about it.
I wondered if Teddy were listening, if he could reach me quickly if I screamed. Hoag was fumbling strangely at his shirt front. He got a button opened. I whiffed an acrid, unclean smell. Then he was holding out something in his hand, something fastened by a string around his neck under his shirt. I forced myself to look at it, and with intense relief recognized it for what it was, a cluster of fresh cloves of garlic worn as a necklace.
Why do you wear it?
It does seem silly, doesn't it? Giving way to superstition like that. But it comforts me. I've had the most frightening feeling of being watched.
Naturally. Mr. Randall has been watching you by your instructions.
Not that. A man in a mirror.
A man and a mirror?
Your reflection in a mirror watches you, but you expect it. It doesn't worry you. This is something new. As if someone were trying to get at me, waiting for a chance. Do you think I'm crazy?
My attention was only half on his words, for I had noticed something when he held out the garlic which had held my attention. His fingertips were ridged and grooved in whirls and loops and arches like anyone else's, and they were certainly not coated with collodion tonight. I decided to get a set of prints for Teddy.
No, I don't think you're crazy. But I think you've let yourself worry too much. You should relax. Wouldn't you like a drink?
I would be grateful for a glass of water.
Water or liquor? It was the glass she was interested in. She excused herself and went out to the kitchen, where she selected a tall glass with smooth, undecorated sides. She polished it carefully, added ice and water with equal care, not to wet the sides. She carried it in, holding it near the bottom. Intentionally or unintentionally, he had outmaneuvered her. He was standing in front of the mirror near the door, where he had evidently been straightening his tie and tidying himself after returning the garlic to its hideaway. When he turned around at her approach, she saw that he had put his gloves back on. She invited him to sit down, thinking that if he did so, he would remove his gloves.
I've imposed on you too long as it is.
He drank half the glass of water, thanked her, and left silently. Randall came in.
He's gone?
She quickly turned.
Yes, he's gone. Teddy, I wish you would do your own dirty work. He makes me nervous. I wanted to scream for you to come in.
Steady, old girl.
That's all very well, but I wish we had never laid eyes on him.
She went to the window and opened it wide.
Too late for herpicide. We're in it now.
His eye rested on the glass.
Say, did you get prints?
No such luck. I think you read my mind.
Too bad.
Teddy, what do you intend to do about him now?
I've got an idea, but let me work it out first. What was this song and dance he was giving you about devils and a man in a mirror watching him?
That wasn't what he said.
Maybe I was the man in the mirror. I watched him in one this morning.
He was just using a metaphor. He's got the jumps.
She turned quickly, thinking that she had seen something move over her shoulder. But there was nothing there but the furniture and the wall. Probably just a reflection in the glass, she decided, and said nothing about it.
I've got him too. As for devils, he's all the devil I want. You know what I'd like?
What?
A big stiff drink and early to bed.
Good idea.
He wandered out into the kitchen and started mixing the prescription.
Want a sandwich too?
Randall found himself standing in his pajamas in the living room of their apartment, facing the mirror that hung near the outer door. His reflection, no, not his reflection, for the image was properly dressed in conservative clothes appropriate to a solid man of business. The image spoke to him.
Edward Randall.
Huh?
Edward Randall, you're summoned. Here, take my hand. Pull up a chair, and you will find you can climb through easily.
It seemed a perfect natural thing to do. In fact, the only reasonable thing to do. He placed a straight chair under the mirror, took the hand offered him, and scrambled through. There was a washstand under the mirror on the far side, which gave him a leg down. He and his companion were standing in a small, white-tiled washroom, such as one finds in office suites.
Hurry, the others are all assembled.
Who are you?
The name is Phipps.
The other bowed slightly.
This way, please.
He opened the door of the washroom and gave him a gentle shove.
I found myself in a room that was obviously a boardroom, with a meeting in session, for the long table was surrounded by about a dozen men. They all had their eyes on me.
Up you go, Mr. Randall.
Another shove, not quite so gentle, and he was sitting in the middle of the polished table. Its hard top felt cold through the thin cotton of his pajama trousers. He drew the jacket around him tightly and shivered.
Cut it out. Let me down from here. I'm not dressed.
I tried to get up, but I seemed unable to accomplish that simple movement.
Somebody behind him chuckled. A voice said,
He's not very fat.
Someone answered,
That doesn't matter for this job.
I was beginning to recognize the situation. The last time, it had been Michigan Boulevard without my trousers. More than once, it had found me back in school again, not only undressed, but lessons unprepared, and late in the bargain. Well, I knew how to beat it. Close your eyes and reach down for the covers, then wake up safe in bed. I closed my eyes.
No use to hide, Mr. Randall. We can see you and you are simply wasting time.
I opened my eyes.
What's the idea? Where am I? Why'd you bring me here? What's going on?
Facing him at the head of the table was a large man. Standing, he must have measured 6'2" at least, and he was broad-shouldered and heavy-boned in proportion. Fat was laid over his huge frame liberally, but his hands were slender and well-shaped and beautifully manicured. His features were not large and seemed smaller, being framed in fat jowls and extra chins. His eyes were small and merry. His mouth smiled a good deal, and he had a trick of compressing his lips and shoving them out.
One thing at a time, Mr. Randall. As to where you are, this is the 13th floor of the Acme building. You remember?
He chuckled as if they shared a private joke.
As to what goes on, this is a meeting of the board of Detheridge and Company.
He managed to bow sitting down over the broad expanse of his belly.
am R. Jefferson Stoles, chairman of the board, at your service, sir.
But
Please, Mr. Randall, introductions first. On my right, Mr. Townsend.
How do you do, Mr. Randall?
how do you do? Look here, this has gone far.
Then Mr. Gravesby, Mr. Wells, Mr. Yoakum, Mr. Printemps, Mr. Jones, Mr. Phipps you have met. He is our secretary. Beyond him is seated Mr. Refsnyder and Mr. Snyder, no relation. And finally, Mr. Parker and Mr. Cruz. Potiphar, I'm sorry to say, could not attend, but we have a quorum.
Randall tried to get up again, but the tabletop seemed unbelievably slippery.
I don't care whether you have a quorum or a gang fight. Let me out of here.
Tut, Mr. Randall, tut, don't you want your questions answered?
Not that bad. Damn it, let me.
But they really must be answered. This is a business session, and you are the business at hand.
Me?
Yes, you. You are, shall we say, a minor item on the agenda, but one which must be cleared up. We do not like your activity, Mr. Randall. You really must cease it.
End of episode 3.